Okay, so right now I'm going to look at the browser storage challenge that we did yesterday. So we click at the README right now. So JavaScript can access the browser's storage mechanism. This helps various websites know you're logged in and why you sometimes have to clear your cookies. So has anyone, you've all probably heard this term before, right? Your browser cookies? Does anyone want to take a shot at defining what's a browser cookie?
Those things the EU hates.
Yep. So cookies are a way to let your browser keep track of information about certain websites. And so things like, when you log into Facebook and then leave the page and come back, Facebook knows you're logged in, probably thanks to browser cookies. Browser storage isn't actually a cookie. It's another way of keeping track. It's actually it's considered to be more secure and doesn't take up as much space on your computer. So local storage doesn't slow your browser down like internet cookies do. So this challenge is important because it introduces us both to the concept of storing information on a website between sessions, and it also introduces us to a concept called conditional rendering. Because the idea here is, for this one, is if you visit a page, if you haven't visited it before, you can fill in a form with your name. And after you fill it in, the website says hello and then your name. And then when you visit again, the website will still say hello, your name. So to do that, we're going to be using something called conditional rendering. Has anyone encountered that term before? No? All right, so it is what it sounds like in many ways. Conditional rendering is the idea that what we actually show on in our page is conditional. It depends on what actually is happening in the background. And that's kind of the foundation for making responsive design for your website, is it being able to show one thing depending if things are one way, or another thing if things are another. So I'm going to clone this down. All right, so we have our index.html, script.js with nothing in it, and we have our README right here. So release 0 is to pseudocode it. So they have kind of an example here. If you have their name, render their name. If you don't have their name, ask for their name, and then render their name. So that's kind of a very basic way of doing it, but we can keep that kind of same logic here. So if we have their name, render hello name. If we don't have their name, we want to render a form, is what it says specifically. Render a form. When the form is filled out, save their name. And then render hello name. So that's kind of the general gist of it, right? We check if it's saved. If it is, here's what we do. If it's not saved, we render a form. When the form's filled out, then we go back to step 1 essentially. So honestly, I don't know what I can add to the pseudocode other than kind of what's there, because at this point we don't really know anything about local storage. So we got to kind of learn about that, and if we want to actually use it. So let's just go to Google and go to local storage, JavaScript. We can see here the official documentation for window.localstorage. So it's the read-only local storage property, which allows us to access a storage object for the document's origin. It's saved across browser sessions. It's similar to session storage, except that while data stored in local storage has no expiration time, data stored in session storage gets cleared when the page session ends. Okay. Data in a local storage object created in private browser incognito session is cleared when the last private tab is closed. Good to know. So we should probably try this out. So I'm actually going to, I'm just going to open up the web page, even though there's nothing on it yet. Because it's a JavaScript thing, which means we can access it through the developer console. So I write local storage. So I see here, I have something called storage, which has an object with the length of 0. So it looks like, based on this and also what it said in the documentation, local storage is used like an object in JavaScript. And they have an example right here. So they have a method called localStorage.setItem. So you say localStorage.setItem, my cat is Tom. Sorry, I didn't plan that, Tom. The syntax for reading it would be cat equals localStorage.getItem, my cat. So this is the key, and this is the value. So let's test that out. So I say localStorage.setItem, favorite color, and blue. Now if I look at local storage again, it shows me there's something with a key of favorite color and the value of blue. And if I run local storage .get item, favorite color, it gives me blue. What questions do you have about how local storage works?
I have a question, not so much about how it works, but how I'm familiar with cookies and sessions. I haven't used local storage specifically before. It looks like it kind of works the same way, but is there like an ideal scenario that you would use local storage in your website, or maybe it's a game or an app or something? Or can you think of just a perfect scenario where you're like, local storage is what I'm going to use for this?
I can't necessarily think of a perfect scenario. The thing that comes to mind mostly is a lot of websites do use local storage to keep track of whether or not a user is currently logged in. And we'll be getting more into more details of how exactly that works later on when we talk about React. And because that essentially, they don't store your username and password in local storage because that's not secure enough. But what they can do is store what's called a token. And the token allows you to say it's unique to each user and each session, so that it's that when you go back to the page, it'll check for a token. And if the token exists, then it'll log you into the web page. And you could also use it for games. The game that comes to mind most when I think of this is Cookie Clicker. Because Cookie Clicker doesn't really have a login mechanism. It just keeps track of your current data based in your browser. So I don't know if this is how Cookie Clicker works, but to my mind, if I was designing a Cookie Clicker type game, I would have something in local storage that keeps track of your current number of, in this case, literal chocolate chip cookies, and how many you get per second.
Yeah, so you just said something that actually made me think of another question.
Sure.
So you said like it can store a token, right? I'm used to like storing tokens in a session, but so it's okay to store tokens in local storage. It's not like it's not a bad practice or anything to like have auth details or something in there. It's perfectly fine. It's just like another mechanism that you could use besides cookies in sessions, it seems like. Then it's just another way. I'm just asking because I'm just used to like the cookies and session stuff, and I'm just not familiar with how local storage is used, so that's why I was asking that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, doesn't session storage expire when like you close out the page?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So
if you want a user to persist after they've closed the web page, local storage would be better than session storage in that case.
Yeah. And so these tokens are often saved in local storage and in cookies. It's kind of done both ways. I'm not sure if one is necessarily better than the other, or if either way is the best way to handle it. I know there are ways to encode it to make it more secure. It's something I think React does automatically. Is like essentially making sure your data is encoded when you save it.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that also, it seems like it's a good way to have like the backend pass things to the front end. So it seems like Django could pass out values that React can use for
exactly
rendering. It seems like that one was, I was able to relate that one to something pretty good. So thank you.
No problem. And the good thing about local storage is that since it is unique to each browser session, it's like, yeah, if someone was on your Facebook, they could, and assuming the token was stored in local storage, they could access your your token from there, but also they'd already be logged into your Facebook account anyway. So at that point, yes?
Yeah, that kind of gets to my question. So local storage is associated with 1, a particular website, and 2, a user, 3, a browser. So like if I look at one website with Chrome and it creates local storage, if I look at it with IE, can IE access it?
No, I'm pretty sure it's just it's not even unique to a user. It's just unique to a particular browser and a particular website. So if you log in, if you have 2 different browsers, if you have Chrome and Safari, if you log in into a website with Chrome, it won't transfer to Safari as well.
And how about, okay, is it also tied to what computer I'm doing it from? If I go to a public computer and log in, does it recognize me?
No, it doesn't, because again, it's not tied to an account. So even if you logged into your Chrome account, it's just logged into the browser, like this particular instance of a browser. So this Chrome on this computer will store this. If I open up Chrome on another computer and go to this website, assuming it was not just in my files, it would not have the local storage there.
Okay. And then same thing again, it sounds like it's not at all kind of pegged to sort of IP address. If I go and put my computer on a different network, it will still be associated with the browser that I'm using on that computer.
Yes, I believe so.
That's correct. Its IP address is irrelevant.
Yeah.
What about objects? Storing and retrieving objects. I put it in the chat. Do you have to use Json Stringify to store and retrieve objects, or does local storage have a method for doing that?
It's what you just said, Json Stringify to store that and extract from it.
Yeah, so yeah, local storage can only technically hold strings, but you can convert to strings even complex objects using json.stringify. That's correct. Any other questions about local storage before we move on?
Yeah, the last part kind of threw me off because it looks like we're able to set in here. So you put favorite color, comma, blue. You basically passed in 2 strings.
Yep.
2 separate strings, and then when we return it, it returns a string, but we had to do a search for it. So would we have to use a Stringify to insert more items, or, because it looks like it's got a built-in method already and it takes in the key and value. So I'm just trying to figure out why we would need to use the Stringify if they already have the built-in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll show you. So I say let object equal, and I'm going to make a JSON object that says, thing is stuff. So I have my object here. And if I try to say local storage dot set item, I'll call this, new object, and I try to pass it in the object. Let's see what happens. Oh, so it has something here called object. So I do local storage dot get item new object. Let's see what comes up. So local storage, when you try to store something that's not a string, will use a toString method, which in this case for an object just turns it into the string object, which isn't very useful. So if I actually want to store an object with like something with an object structure, I can do it like this. I could say, so it'd be string, or say let string obj equal, and I'm going to use a method called json.stringify on my original object. So string object should look like this now. So now I can see local storage dot set item new object is going to be this string object. I'm going to clear this out. I got to do it this way. Then we do local storage dot get item new object. So now it's not an object yet, it's still a string. But since it looks like this, I can convert it back into a regular JavaScript object if I want to. I believe it would be json.parse local storage dot get item new object. So it's a few extra steps, but if you want to store very complex data in using this structure, you can convert things to and from strings using the JSON library.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think the other alternative that I was looking at would be you use a for loop, go through every key in that object you're trying to pass into it, and just assign it, its own key and object. But yeah, this makes it a lot quicker. And I imagine it does it under the hood, doing Stringify, but makes it one line, easy to read. You don't have to set up, think of the logic of how to set it up. So.
Yeah, and we're actually going to be talking more about JSON data in a little bit after this. So you'll be using JSON Stringify and JSON parse quite a bit, actually. All right, cool. So now that we know a little bit more about how local storage works, we can update our README a bit. So instead of saying if we have their name, we could say, if local storage has key name, render hello name. If we don't have their name, render a form. We can keep that as is. When the form is filled out, we want to say, something like local storage set key name to user's name, then render hello name. So still not much more complicated, but now we have a better idea of what actually we're doing. See some things in the chat. I'm going to take a look. All right, so before we get into the JavaScript logic, let's actually set up our HTML here. So I'm going to set up, this general thing. I'll call this, greeting app. And so now this kind of takes us to our conditional rendering thing, because we're going to see one of two things depending on whether or not we have that name in local storage. Either just, maybe like a header that says hello name. Otherwise, we're going to see a form. So we're going to need some place to put those, but we don't want to render either of them in HTML right away. So what I'm going to do is I'm create a div. I'm going to give it an ID. like container, but I'm not going to put anything inside of it yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first say, I'm going to say const container equals document.getElementById by container. So that way we have that HTML element available and we can manipulate it however we want. So now we can actually do the work of checking local storage. Oh, but before we do anything else, I should also make sure that we link to our JavaScript document. All right, so let's say, let name equal local storage dot get item name. And one thing we're gonna have to figure out is, okay, what if we try to find something that doesn't exist yet? What happens? And we can test that by just doing local storage dot get item name, and that gives us null. Null is something we can work with, because I think we should be able to say if name like so, because if I'm not mistaken, name is a null is a falsy value. So if there is a name, we should get something. If there isn't a name, we should get something else. We should get null. So I'm actually going to do the else first and then get to what we do. Well, actually, no, we can just do that right now. So if there is a name, we need to make sure that it shows up within our container. So we could just do something like this. Container.inner text equals, I've suddenly completely forgot how to do string interpolation in JavaScript. And so changing the inner text properly just allows you to say, okay, what text actually shows up? The question is now, we need to render something a bit more complex if there isn't a name, right? So what do we need to actually render there?
You have to do basically give a prompt and then a text box to enter the name.
Yep, so we'll need to give them a text box and a submit button at the very least. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say container.innerText equals please enter your name, just so we can test something out, make sure it works at all. Okay, so we have please enter your name, but we still need to fill it with, add that input box and the input box and the submit button. And the cool thing about JavaScript interacting with the DOM is not only can it manipulate the DOM, it can also create brand new DOM elements and add them to the DOM kind of out of nowhere. So you could say let input form equal document dot its create element. And the element we're making is an input. So essentially we've created a document element. And if I console.log input form, we should see an HTML element. So it's just an input with nothing else to it. And it's not showing up on the page yet because we need to actually tell it to put it into the DOM once we've created it. So to do that, I can do something like container dot append child input form. And so I think I mentioned this kind of at the beginning of the week, is that HTML elements we kind of divide them up into parents and children. So if we look at here, our body tag is the parent of this div and the child of the HTML tag. And so we're giving our div tag another child, which essentially goes into this space right here. And voila, we have an input form. And we can make it a little more, jazz it up a little bit. Like so. That looks nicer. And then we're going to need a button. So we can do that the exact same way. You can say let button equal document.createElement button. And then again, container.append child button. Oh, the button, we should probably add some text to it, right? So we could say button.inner text equals submit. There we go. All right. Any questions on how I've added these new elements to the DOM? This all making sense so far? All right. So I'm going to try it out. If I hit Noah, nothing happens. Why not?
Because you didn't tell it to do anything?
Exactly. So this isn't actually, it's not inside a form element. So there's no default behavior for the submit button. It's just a button with no behavior associated with it. And of course, we can make sure something is associated with it, right? Because we already have the button saved as a variable before we even actually put it into the DOM. And if we have this saved as an element, what can we do with it to give it some actual functionality?
You can add event listener, like an on-click or something.
Exactly. We can say button.add event listener. It's going to be a click. And we can give it an anonymous function to run when that happens. So let's just test it out, make sure we can actually make the button actually do stuff. So alert, I've been clicked. Oops. Yep, so we've added an event listener to the button. That works out very well. I'm going to just add some line breaks here. All right, so that's cool. So in that case, so we have a button that can do stuff when clicked. What do we actually want this button to do?
Add the text from the field into local storage.
Exactly. So first, so we need to say, all right, local storage dot set item name. And then we need to get the actual text from our input form. So input form dot. So how do we actually get the value? What's the actual thing for getting this? How do we select just this part?
Dot value.
Exactly. Important dot value. So if I do this right now, hit submit, doesn't look like anything happened. But if I refresh the page, it added it to local storage because now it's saying hello Noah. And if I check local storage right now, there's name. So we're almost there, because we were able to make it so that the button was actually able to change local storage, so it remembered me for next time. But we're not quite there yet, because we want to make sure that as soon as I hit submit, that it automatically changes it to this, rather than just waiting until we do it next time. So I'm actually going to clear out local storage so we can keep testing it. So local storage.clear just clears it all out. So what do we want to happen after we change local storage, add this to local storage? What's the next step?
I did it the super simple way. I just forced the page to reload.
Mm-hmm. And how do you do that?
I said something.reload.
Mm-hmm. I believe it's window.reload, if I'm not mistaken. No? All right, I always forget this one. So we can always just say JavaScript reload page. How do you do that? Is it just reload? That's location.reload. Ah. So location.reload. So we try this again. Hit submit. It refreshes the page. That works out. So location.reload is one way of doing it. Another way, if you don't actually want to force a reload of the entire page, is we could also just, since we already have access to container, we could do something like this. Container dot remove. I don't want to actually, the kind of the nuclear option here would just be container.innerHTML equals, and then we'll just copy this here. So it's very similar to what we did earlier when we said container.innerText equals hello name. InnerHTML kind of takes it a step further. So all right, so I'm going to try to demonstrate this as best I can. One sec. So I'm going to clear out local storage again. So we look at our DOM. So right now, the inner HTML of this div is please enter your name, an input, and a button. The inner text is this, but the inner HTML includes all of its children. And so when we fill that out, we can actually, oh, something went wrong. Oh, okay, I know what we did wrong there. But in this case, it could just replace the entire inner HTML, children elements and all, with the text. And the reason it did that is because it did null here is because I said hello name when I haven't defined name in this thing. So it'd say hello local storage dot get item name, and that should fix that problem. So again, I'm going to clear out local storage one more time. Going to keep this part open so that we can actually see the DOM update in real time. So the page hasn't reloaded. We've just completely replaced the inner HTML with this string and nothing else, which maybe is not the best way to do that, but we're not trying to earn points for style at this point. What questions do you have about local storage and how we kind of updated the DOM this way?
Is there a particular benefit or reason that you decided to add this stuff in the script instead of doing it in the HTML file?
When you say this stuff, what do you mean?
I stuck all my buttons and stuff like in the HTML file,
Mm-hmm.
and I edited it in here, but that's where I stuck it.
So you set the form and all
Buttons.
of that in the HTML document itself?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Is that bad practice?
Well, that depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Was the form visible even when after someone had entered their name?
No, because I did like a block or what is it? It's called like block element or something like that, or displays equals block.
So you essentially hid the form once it was entered.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not sure. I don't feel qualified to tell you whether it's good practice or bad practice in this case. It's just different practice. I did it this particular way because I just wanted to make it kind of make everything as JavaScripty as I possibly could. But in this particular case, just hiding an HTML element is also valid. And it does allow you that practice does actually cover your bases in some cases when a browser may not be JavaScript enabled, which, believe it or not, still does happen. One of the biggest obstacles to designing new software half the time is accounting for the fact that some people are still using old versions of Internet Explorer for some reason. So sometimes if a browser doesn't actually have JavaScript enabled, they wouldn't see anything from here. So you doing that allows there to be a form rendered even if the form doesn't work. What other questions do you have? All right. So in that case, let's make it a 10-minute break. Why not? Be back here at 9:57, and we will get started talking about asynchronous JavaScript.